It was a very bad day at the office for Newcastle United as they were beaten 4-1 by Aston Villa in a crunch game in the Champions League race at Villa Park. It's about 45 minutes on from full time. Here I am with an instant reaction, and let's get into it. Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel, welcome back to another video. Bit different today, I'm doing an instant reaction rather than a Monday reaction, partly because Newcastle United have been heavily beaten by Aston Villa and there's lots of talk and lots of points I want to make about what happens next, but also because I've got a lot of work on in the next couple of days and I don't think I'll have time to film the video in the way that I want to over the next couple of days. But before we get into it, as always, please like, share and subscribe to the videos, to the channel. More videos coming, more Newcastle United content over the summer and towards the end of the season and next season with Newcastle in Europe. I'm really hoping to turbocharge the channel, but I need your support. I need your subscription. So like, share and subscribe if you haven't already. And there'll be a content plan coming up at the end of the season with all of the information of what I'm planning to do. So please do get involved. It really does help. Questions are going to be where do Newcastle go from here? But the context I want to offer here is there's a lot of perspective needed. Newcastle came into this game with 6 straight wins, 17 scored and 3 conceded, and in great shape, in control of the Champions League race, 3rd in the league, and absolutely not needing to beat Aston Villa in this game. Yes, the result is poor, yes, the performance was poor, and this has given Villa some much needed impetus, but they need to go to Manchester City on Wednesday and win that game really to regain momentum in the Champions League race. Newcastle United welcome Ipswich next week and they need to win the game to regain themselves. They're still 3rd in the league, still very much in control. Yes, there'll be Forest's game against Spurs, and as I say, that aforementioned game between City and Villa to come. We'll have to see what happens with those results, but Newcastle still remain very much in the driving seat for a top 5 finish, and there's been lots of talk about overtaking Arsenal and securing 3rd place. I think ultimately lots of Newcastle fans would just take 5th if it was offered to them now to get into the Champions League and really build for next season. So with that in mind, that's where the perspective is needed. Also, there'll be a lot of hyperbole about the performance and the fact that Newcastle capitulated in the second half and there were so many other chances for Aston Villa. Ollie Watkins was brilliant in that first half, targeting Fabian Schär, particularly. Morgan Rogers made things tick in the midfield. He's so tall, 6'2", but he's so good on the ball and dynamic. And I think I've mentioned this before, he's the type of player that I really think Newcastle should have been looking at, and it shows that there's lots of EFL talent and lots of proof in the pudding that Newcastle don't need to go and spend heavily on players, because Villa have a couple there who are not major £60 million arrivals, and there is context there that they've brought in Marco Asensio and Marcus Rashford and Daniel Marlin in January. Watkins could have had a hat-trick in the first half. The goal after 33 seconds puts Newcastle on the back foot. They did actually do quite well to first get themselves level with Fabian Schär's goal, and then I thought before half-time regained themselves a little bit, and they never dominated the game, but they were always in it. They were never particularly flustered, and I thought actually it was development of their mentality that they could do that. And Matt Ritchie, who was a pundit for Sky, said that at half-time they're playing with big game experience, and that was a positive. And actually up until 65, 70 minutes, I thought this was a game which was giving me confidence that Newcastle would go on to qualify for the Champions League, because while they hadn't beaten Villa, they'd survived going into this game where Villa needed to win. They were really focused, they were very much up for it. They bounced back from that loss in the Champions League against PSG. People thought, was it going to be a problem emotionally and physically to really go again? But they also had a day's extra rest on Newcastle, who also had excursions in the week and haven't made a change to their first 11 for 6 or 7 games. That's where the difference lays. And then you look at the subs that they brought on to really pull the game away. Andre Onana, Daniel Marlin, Marcus Rashford. That's really the difference between Villa and Newcastle. I think Newcastle have better individuals. I think Sandro Tonali, Alexander Isak, Anthony Gordon, Harvey Barnes at the moment, Joe Linton, Bruno Guimaraes, all of those players would get into Aston Villa's team. But where Newcastle had Joe Willock, maybe Callum Wilson and Sean Longstaff on the bench, as I say, the aforementioned players that Villa had, that's the difference. That's where Villa have excelled in creating that extra depth, and ultimately that came to the fore in this game. So this was a really, really difficult day for Newcastle, but as I say, let's not get too down about it. But also, again, this is kind of typical. Whoever's at home often wins quite heavily. If you go back to the 22-23 season, Newcastle won 4-0 at St James's Park, Aston Villa won 3-0. Newcastle United won 5-1 last season at St James's Park. The 2-1 win last January was a complete outlier. It came out of nowhere. No one really expected it. It happened. That seems to be an outlier because Newcastle won 3-0 back at St James's Park, and obviously today the 4-1 win for Villa. Lots of those things have come from very, very similar situations, which is whoever gets the momentum first, they scored early, they really ran away with the game, and that's very difficult to stop. And I think people have criticised Newcastle for not being their usual aggressive selves. Well, if they are aggressive, then it creates space for a very dynamic attacking front three against a very slow and ageing defence, which already allowed Villa to cause problems. So I think there was tactical credit to Unai Emery, who, as I say, put Watkins on Fabian Schär and really made that pay. This is very much like Newcastle getting a taste of their own medicine at St James's Park. Villa did to Newcastle, Newcastle did to Manchester United last week, and they've got to recover. I think that they absolutely will. It was just one game too far, and it shows the lack of depth. It shows the fact that in January, where Newcastle sold Almiron and Lloyd Kelly and took a risk for the summer in terms of being able to really push on with recruitment in terms of the PSR headroom, Villa went the other way and strengthened their squad for a push into the Champions League with Rashford and Asensio and Marlon joining. All three of them did end up coming on and making a big difference in this game. They took a risk, Newcastle, and in the summer they really do need to add depth and add extra quality off the bench to ultimately compete in these games, because Villa are very difficult to stop. They still have to go to Manchester City. Newcastle United welcome Ipswich, who could well be relegated in the next couple of weeks. They could put another nail in that coffin. Champions League qualification is still very much in Newcastle's hands. I wouldn't be too downhearted about it. This was just a game too far at a very, very difficult place, as I say, where these results are not out of the ordinary. Thanks so much for joining me on this instant reaction. Like, share and subscribe. As I say, I'll be back next week with another video looking ahead to Ipswich, and I will be at St James's Park to give you a reaction from that game as well. Hopefully another win to get Newcastle back on track in their Champions League race. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.